I took the job at the last stop because I was desperate, not because I believed in ghost stories or small-town superstitions. 27 years old with a degree in communications and a resume full of rejection emails. That's what qualifies you for the graveyard shift at a forgotten motel on Route 66. The pay was minimal, the location was isolated, and the interview consisted of a single question from Henry, the day manager. Can you follow instructions exactly as they're given? I said yes. I needed to say yes. The motel itself looked like something preserved in amber from 1962. The neon sign out front, a turquoise arrow pointing toward the office with vacancy flickering beneath it, cast strange shadows across the cracked asphalt parking lot. Inside, the lobby smelled of old carpet, lemon furniture polish, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Something stale and ancient, like the air itself had been trapped there for decades. Henry met me at 11:30 on my first night, a Tuesday in late September. He was somewhere in his 60s with gray stubble and the kind of exhaustion that settles into a person's bones after years of poor sleep. He didn't smile when he shook my hand. His palm was cold and dry, like old paper. "You'll get the hang of it," he said, leading me behind the front desk. "Check-ins are rare after midnight. Mostly it's just keeping an eye on things, making sure the guests have what they need, making sure nothing gets out of hand." He showed me the logbook, the key rack, the ancient computer system that wheezed to life with a grinding sound. Then he pulled out a folded piece of lined paper from the desk drawer. The creases were worn soft, as if it had been folded and unfolded countless times. The handwriting was neat but hurried, written in blue ballpoint pen that had bled slightly through the page. "These are the rules," Henry said, placing the paper in front of me. "Read them. Memorize them. Follow them exactly." I picked up the paper and read, "Rule 1. Never open the back door after midnight, no matter what you hear. Rule 2. If someone asks for room 13, tell them it's occupied, even if it's not. Rule 3. Do not engage in conversation with the lone traveler in the gray trench coat. Rule 4. If the phone rings after 3 a.m., don't answer it. It's not for you. Rule 5. If you hear tapping on your window after hours, don't look." I looked up at Henry, expecting him to crack a smile or admit it was some kind of hazing ritual for new employees. He didn't. His expression remained perfectly serious, his eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made my stomach tighten. Are you serious?" I asked, completely. "But what do they mean? Why can't I open the back door? What's wrong with room 13? Henry's jaw tightened. "The rules exist for a reason, Sam. You don't need to understand them. You just need to follow them, every single one of them, every single night, no exceptions." "What happens if I don't?" He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker across his face. Something that looked like grief, or maybe regret. "You won't last long enough to ask me that question again," he said quietly. Then he grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair and headed toward the door. He paused with his hand on the handle, his back to me. "The rules keep you safe. They keep the guests safe. They keep this place from becoming something worse than it already is." He glanced back over his shoulder. "Lock up after I leave. And Sam, trust me when I say that you'll want to believe the rules before you're forced to." The door closed behind him and I was alone. For the first hour I tried to rationalize what Henry had told me. Every workplace has its quirks, its strange traditions and unwritten protocols. Maybe this was just the motel equivalent of "the customer is always right," or "don't microwave fish in the break room." Eccentric instructions from a longtime employee who'd been working nights too long and had developed some harmless superstitions. But as midnight came and went, and the silence of the motel settled around me like a physical weight, I found myself glancing at the folded paper again and again. The rules seemed to stare back at me from where I'd placed them beside the keyboard. The motel had 12 rooms total arranged in an L shape around the parking lot. According to the computer, only 4 were occupied. A family in room 3, a couple in room 7, an elderly woman in room 9, and someone named Jay Morrison in room 11. Room 13 showed as vacant in the system, but when I looked at the key rack, there was no key hanging on the hook labeled 13. I noticed the number had been written in faded marker, not engraved like the others. The back door was located at the far end of the front desk area, past a small break room with a coffee maker and a humming mini-fridge. It was painted an institutional beige and had a simple deadbolt lock. A small rectangular window sat at eye level, covered from the outside by what looked like thick grime or paint. I couldn't see anything through it. I walked over and stood in front of it, listening. Nothing. Just the buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead and the occasional creak of the building settling. I checked my phone. 12:47 a.m. Rule 1 said never to open it after midnight, but why? What was out there? I reached for the deadbolt, then stopped. Henry's voice echoed in my memory. You'll want to believe the rules before you're forced to. I stepped back and returned to the desk. The night crawled forward with painful slowness. I reorganized the brochure rack. I wiped down the counter. I scrolled through my phone, refreshing social media feeds I'd already read twice. Outside, the neon sign flickered rhythmically, casting alternating patterns of light and shadow across the empty parking lot. At 2:17 a.m., the family from room 3 came through the lobby, the parents herding 2 sleepy children toward their car. They were checking out early, the father explained, because they'd decided to drive through the night instead of waiting until morning. His wife stood by the door, her arms wrapped around herself, glancing nervously toward the hallway that led to the rooms. Everything okay with your stay? I asked as I processed their checkout. Fine, the father said quickly. Too quickly. His wife met my eyes for just a moment. You should leave too, she whispered. Before it gets later. Then they were gone, the door chiming softly as it closed behind them. I stood alone in the lobby, my heart beating slightly faster. The clock above the desk ticked steadily toward 3 a.m., and I found myself watching it, counting down the minutes until Rule 4 would become relevant. That's when I heard the first knock. It came from the back door, 3 slow, deliberate raps that echoed through the empty office. The sound seemed to hang in the air long after it had faded, as if the knock itself had weight and substance. I stood frozen behind the desk, my hand still resting on the mouse, my eyes locked on the beige door at the end of the hallway. I checked my phone. 2:33 a.m. Never open the back door after midnight, no matter what you hear. It was probably just a late delivery, or maybe someone had gotten confused and gone to the wrong door. There were a dozen rational explanations, none of which could fully quiet the sudden hammering of my heart. I waited. Silence settled back over the motel like a blanket, thick and suffocating. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed steadily. Outside, a truck passed on the distant highway, its engine fading into the desert night. Then it came again. 3 knocks, identical to the first, slow, deliberate, patient. This time I heard something else beneath the sound, a soft scraping like fingernails dragging across wood. My breath caught in my throat. I took a step toward the hallway, then stopped. Every instinct screamed at me to investigate, to open the door and prove to myself that there was nothing supernatural happening here, just an ordinary visitor or a branch blown against the door by wind. But Henry's face appeared in my mind, that haunted look of exhaustion and something deeper, something like resignation. I grabbed the folded paper and read Rule 1 again, as if the words might have changed. They hadn't. The instruction was absolute. Never open the back door after midnight, no matter what you hear, no matter what. The knocking came a third time, louder now, more insistent. 3 heavy blows that seemed to vibrate through the walls. I heard a voice, muffled and indistinct, calling from the other side. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was pleading. Desperate. My hand was on the counter, my legs already moving before I consciously decided to walk toward the door. I made it 3 steps down the hallway before I forced myself to stop. The break room was dark except for the green glow of the coffee maker's power light. The back door stood silent now, waiting. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and uncertain. "The front entrance is around the building. This door isn't for guests." No response, just silence, deeper and more complete than before. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my entire body tense, waiting for another knock. It didn't come. Slowly, carefully, I backed away from the hallway and returned to the desk. My hands were shaking slightly as I gripped the edge of the counter. Nothing had happened. I had followed the rule and nothing had happened. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by embarrassment. I was acting like a child afraid of the dark, jumping at shadows and mysterious noises. This was an old building in the middle of nowhere. Of course, it made strange sounds. I tried to return to my phone, scrolling mindlessly through articles I wasn't really reading. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being evaluated somehow. The motel felt different now, as if my decision not to open the door had shifted something fundamental in the atmosphere. The clock ticked forward, 2:47 a.m., 2:53 a.m., 2:58 a.m. At exactly 3 a.m., the phone rang. The sound cut through the silence like a blade, shrill and insistent. The landline on the desk, an old beige model with a coiled cord, rattled as it rang. I stared at it, watching the red light blink in rhythm with the ringing. If the phone rings after 3 a.m., don't answer it. It's not for you. But what if it was Henry? What if there was an emergency? What if a guest needed something? The phone rang a second time. I reached for it, my hand hovering inches above the receiver. Through the plastic, I could hear a faint sound, not quite static, but something that reminded me of wind through a canyon. Or maybe breathing. 3rd ring. My fingers trembled. 4th ring. I pulled my hand back and shoved it into my pocket. I watched the phone ring 3 more times, each peal seeming louder than the last, before it finally fell silent. The sudden quiet was worse than the noise had been. I sat in my chair, my pulse throbbing in my ears, staring at the phone as if it might spontaneously come to life. The red message light blinked twice, then went dark. No one left a voicemail. I checked the caller ID display, but it showed only a string of zeros. 0. "Okay," I whispered to myself, trying to slow my breathing. "Okay. You're okay. You followed the rules. Nothing happened because you followed the rules." But something had happened. I could feel it, the same way you can feel a storm building even before you see the clouds. The air in the lobby had changed, becoming thicker somehow, harder to breathe. The shadows in the corners seemed darker, more substantial. The fluorescent lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. I pulled up the security camera feeds on the old monitor beside the desk. The system was ancient, showing grainy black and white images from 4 cameras, one covering the parking lot, one facing the hallway of rooms, one pointed at the front entrance, and one, I discovered, aimed at the back door. I clicked on the back door feed. The camera showed the door from an angle above and to the left, capturing the entire back entrance and a small strip of desert scrubland beyond. The image quality was poor, pixelated and washed out by the single floodlight mounted above the door. But I could see clearly that no one was there. No person, no animal, no vehicle. Nothing that could have produced the knocking sounds. I rewound the footage to 2:33 a.m. watching the timestamp in the corner of the screen. At exactly 2:33, the image flickered. Not a technical glitch, something else. The shadows near the door seemed to condense, growing denser for just a moment. Then came the first knock, clearly visible as the door rattled in its frame. But there was nothing outside. No hand, no visible source for the sound. I watched all 3 rounds of knocking, my mouth dry, my stomach turning. Each time the door moved as if struck by physical force. Each time the shadows darkened, each time absolutely nothing appeared on camera. At 2:41 a.m., after the knocking stopped, I saw something that made my breath catch. For just a fraction of a second, perhaps 3 or 4 frames, a shape appeared near the door. Tall, impossibly thin. And then it was gone, leaving only static on the screen before the image cleared. I paused the footage and replayed those few seconds over and over, but I couldn't make out any details. The shape was more of an absence than a presence, a place where the light didn't quite reach, where the pixels seemed to refuse to form a coherent image. I shut off the monitor. The rest of the night passed in agonizing slowness. I didn't move from behind the desk. I kept the folded rules in front of me, reading them again and again like a protective charm. Every sound made me flinch. Every shadow seemed to move with purpose. At 6:47 a.m., the sky outside began to lighten from black to deep blue. I had never been so grateful to see dawn approaching. The motel felt different in the growing light, less oppressive, more mundane. The elderly woman from room 9 came through the lobby at 7:15, smiling pleasantly and commenting on what a quiet night it had been. Henry arrived at 7:45, looking exactly as exhausted as he had when he left. He glanced at me, taking in my appearance. I hadn't moved from the chair in hours, and I could feel the tension in my shoulders and neck. "Everything go all right?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. I opened my mouth to tell him about the knocking, about the phone call, about the shadow on the security footage, but something in his expression stopped me. He already knew. Of course he knew. "I followed the rules," I said instead. Something that might have been relief flickered across his face. "Good," he said quietly. "That's good, Sam." He took his position behind the desk, and I gathered my things, preparing to leave. As I reached the door, he called after me. "Sam, tonight if someone comes in asking about room 13, remember Rule 2. I nodded and stepped out into the morning sun. The desert air was already warm and the sky was clear and bright. Everything looked normal, safe, real. But as I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw the last stop receding behind me, its neon sign dark in the daylight. And I could swear just for a moment that I saw a tall figure in a gray coat standing at the corner of the building, watching my car disappear down Route 66. I spent the day in my cramped studio apartment trying to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard the knocking. 3 slow, deliberate raps that seemed to echo from inside my skull. I kept telling myself it was just the building settling, a confused guest, maybe even a prank. But I couldn't erase the image from the security footage. That tall, impossible shape that had appeared for just a few frames before dissolving into static. By the time I returned to the last stop that night, I had almost convinced myself that I'd overreacted. The human mind plays tricks in isolation, especially during the dead hours between midnight and dawn. I'd worked myself up over nothing, let Henry's mysterious rules get under my skin. That conviction lasted until I walked into the lobby and saw Todd Greeley sitting in one of the faded orange chairs near the window. Todd was a regular according to the logbook I'd studied during my orientation. He was a long-haul trucker who used the last stop as a waypoint on his routes, always checking in for a few hours of sleep before pushing on toward Albuquerque or Flagstaff. Late 40s with a weathered face and a permanent squint from years of staring at highway lines. He'd been staying at the motel on and off for months. "New night, guy," Todd said as I came in, his voice carrying the rough edge of cigarettes and coffee. He was eating a sandwich from a convenience store, the wrapper spread across his lap. "Henry told me about you." "Sam," I said, moving behind the desk. "Sam Williams." "Todd Greeley, you settling in all right?" He took a bite of his sandwich, watching me with an expression that was almost amused. "Henry give you his little list of rules yet?" I hesitated. "Yeah, he did." Todd laughed, a short bark of sound. "Don't worry about that stuff. Henry's been doing nights here too long. It makes you weird. Seeing things that aren't there, hearing things. I've been coming through this place twice a month for 8 months now, and I've never seen anything stranger than a family of raccoons getting into the dumpster." Something in his casual dismissal made me want to defend the rules, even though I'd been skeptical of them myself just hours ago. He seemed pretty serious about it. Henry's serious about everything. It's part of his charm. Todd crumpled up his sandwich wrapper and tossed it in the trash can near the desk. "Look, this place is old. It makes noise. The wiring is probably from the Eisenhower administration. And yeah, you get some odd characters coming through at night. This is Route 66. It attracts weirdos like moths to a flame." "But ghost stories?" He shook his head. "That's just people trying to make boring nights more interesting." I wanted to tell him about the knocking, about the phone call, about the shape in the security footage. But with the sun still painting orange light across the parking lot and Todd's matter-of-fact presence filling the lobby, it all seemed absurd. Maybe he was right. Maybe Henry was just eccentric. Todd checked into room 11 at 10:30 p.m., paying in cash as always. "I'll be out by 3:30, he said. "Got to be in Flagstaff by 8. He took his key and headed toward the rooms, whistling tunelessly. The night settled in gradually. The couple in room 7 came through the lobby around 11, asking about places to eat breakfast in the morning. I gave them a brochure for a diner 15 miles west. The elderly woman from room 9 called the desk at 11:47 to request extra towels, which I delivered personally, grateful for something to do. Midnight came and went. I found myself watching the back door, but it remained silent and still. No knocking, no sounds at all except the usual settling noises of an old building. By 1:30 a.m., I was starting to relax. Maybe Todd was right. Maybe last night had been a fluke or my own paranoid imagination. Maybe I could actually make this job work without losing my mind. At 2:15 a.m., a man walked into the lobby. I hadn't heard a car pull up, hadn't heard the door open. One moment the lobby was empty, and the next he was standing there, just inside the entrance, as if he'd materialized out of the shadows themselves. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and thin in a way that seemed unnatural, as if his bones were longer than they should be. He wore a gray trench coat that hung past his knees, the collar turned up around his neck. His face was pale, almost luminous in the fluorescent light, with dark eyes that seemed to catch and hold the light in an odd way. He didn't blink. "Good evening," he said. His voice was soft, cultured with an accent I couldn't quite place. I find myself in need of accommodation. Every nerve in my body suddenly fired at once. I grabbed the folded paper from beside the keyboard and scanned it frantically. Rule 3. Do not engage in conversation with the lone traveler in the gray trench coat. My mouth went dry. The man stood perfectly still, watching me with those strange, dark eyes. He didn't breathe. I realized I hadn't seen his chest rise or fall once since he'd entered. "I have a reservation," I managed to say, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. "Let me check you in." I pulled up the reservation system, my hands shaking slightly. I didn't look at him directly, keeping my eyes on the computer screen. The system loaded with agonizing slowness. "This is a charming establishment," the man said. his voice drifting across the desk like smoke. So much history in these walls, so many stories. Don't engage. Don't respond. I focused on the screen, typing random keys just to have something to do. I wonder, he continued, on what stories you'll add to this place. Everyone who works here leaves something behind. A piece of themselves, scattered in the dark corners. Do you feel it yet? The way this place gets into your bones? I could feel his eyes on me, could sense him leaning forward slightly, waiting for a response. The air in the lobby had grown cold, and I could see my breath forming small clouds in front of my face. The front door chimed, and Todd walked in, rubbing his eyes. "Hey, Sam, sorry to bother you, but the light in my room keeps flickering, and it's driving me." He stopped mid-sentence, noticing the man in the gray coat for the first time. For a moment, the three of us stood frozen in a strange tableau. Then Todd's face split into a grin. "Well, look at you. Going for the classic mysterious stranger look, huh?" He walked over to the man, extending his hand. "I'm Todd. You with one of those Route 66 tour groups? The historical reenactment folks?" "Todd," I started to say, but he waved me off. "Don't worry, Sam, I got this. So what's your deal, friend? You looking for a room?" Todd clapped the man on the shoulder in a gesture of false camaraderie. The moment Todd's hand made contact with the gray coat, the fluorescent lights went out. In the sudden darkness, I heard Todd gasp, not a shout of surprise, but a sharp intake of breath that cut off abruptly. The emergency exit signs cast a dim red glow across the lobby, just enough to see shapes and shadows. The man in the gray coat stood exactly where he'd been, utterly motionless. Todd was beside him, his hand still on the man's shoulder, but something was wrong with his posture. He seemed to be leaning forward at an angle that defied physics, as if gravity had shifted direction just for him. "Todd?" My voice came out as a whisper. The lights flickered once, twice, then came back on. Todd was standing normally now, his hand at his side, staring at nothing. His face had gone pale, and a thin line of blood trickled from his left nostril. The man in the gray coat smiled, a terrible, too wide expression that showed too many teeth. "Thank you for the conversation," the man said, looking at Todd with something that might have been satisfaction. "It's been enlightening." Then he turned and walked down the hallway toward the rooms, his footsteps making no sound on the carpet. I watched him go, my heart hammering, unable to move or speak. Todd blinked slowly, like someone waking from a deep sleep. He wiped at his nose, saw the blood on his fingers, and frowned. "What?" He looked at me, confused. "What just happened?" "You talked to him," I said, my voice shaking. "Rule 3. You weren't supposed to engage in conversation with him." "Who?" Todd looked around the lobby. "What are you talking about?" "I came out here because the light in my room." He stopped, his frown deepening. Someone was, but he couldn't seem to finish the thought. His eyes had gone distant, unfocused. He touched his nose again, staring at the blood as if he couldn't quite understand where it had come from. "I need to..." Todd moved toward the door like a sleepwalker, his movements mechanical and wrong. "I need to check on something." "Todd, wait!" But he was already outside, walking across the parking lot toward his truck. I watched through the window as he climbed into the cab and just sat there, staring straight ahead, not moving. I looked down the hallway where the man in the gray coat had disappeared. The corridor was empty, the doors all closed. I checked the security monitors, cycling through the camera feeds. Room 11, Todd's room, showed an empty bed and flickering lights. Room 13 showed an image so corrupted with static and digital artifacts that I couldn't make out anything except shadows and the vague impression of something tall standing in the center of the room. I reached for the phone to call Henry, then stopped. What would I even say? I looked at the clock, 2:47 a.m. 13 minutes until Rule 4 would go into effect again. I sat behind the desk, the folded rules clutched in my hand, and waited for whatever came next. Todd didn't come back inside. Through the lobby window, I watched his truck sitting in the parking lot, the cab dark except for the occasional flash of his cell phone screen. He remained there motionless for the rest of my shift. Every time I checked the security cameras, he was in the same position, sitting behind the wheel, staring at nothing. The man in the gray coat didn't reappear. Room 13 remained on the monitors as nothing but static and shadow. When Henry arrived at 7:45 a.m., he took one look at my face and sighed. "Which rule?" he asked quietly. "3, I said. "But it wasn't me." Todd came out and started talking to him before I could stop it. Henry's expression went carefully blank. He glanced toward the parking lot, toward Todd's truck. "Is he still here?" "He's been in his truck since 2:47. He hasn't moved." "He'll leave eventually," Henry said, but he didn't sound convinced. "They usually do. They just leave." He paused, then added, "Most of them." "Most of them?" I stood up, my body stiff from hours of sitting in the same position. "Henry, what the hell is going on here?" "What was that thing?" "Because it wasn't a person. I know it wasn't a person." Henry was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the desk. When he spoke, his voice was tired. "Did you follow all the other rules?" "Yes." "Then you're safe. That's what matters." He looked up at me. "Go home, Sam. Get some sleep. Come back tonight and follow the rules again. That's the job." "That's not enough," I said, hearing the frustration in my own voice. "You can't expect me to keep coming back here without explaining what's happening, what that thing wants, why these rules exist." "I don't expect anything," Henry replied. "You can quit right now if you want. Walk away and forget you ever worked here. No one would blame you." He met my eyes. "But if you stay, you follow the rules. No questions, no exceptions. That's the agreement." I wanted to quit. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to walk out the door and never come back. But standing there in the morning light, looking at Henry's exhausted face, I realized something. He was trapped here. He'd been following these rules for years, watching new employees come and go, probably watching some of them make the same mistake Todd had made. And if I left, someone else would take this job. Someone who didn't know the rules yet, who wouldn't believe them until it was too late. "I'll be back tonight," I heard myself say. Henry nodded slowly. "Then you might want to look in the back office, bottom drawer of the filing cabinet behind the folders marked Utilities. There's something there that might help you understand." He wouldn't elaborate further, just took his position behind the desk and pulled up the day's reservations on the computer. I left him there, stepping out into the desert morning, the sun already hot on my skin. But I didn't go straight home. Instead, I drove to the nearest diner, a weathered truck stop 15 miles east, and ordered coffee while I sat in a corner booth and tried to make sense of what I'd witnessed. The man in the gray coat, the lights going out, Todd's face going pale, blood dripping from his nose, the way his eyes had lost focus as if something had been scooped out of him. Do not engage in conversation with the lone traveler in the gray trench coat. The rule hadn't said be careful or be cautious. It had said do not, absolute and unequivocal. And Todd had broken it casually, dismissing the rules as superstition. I stayed at the diner until noon, then drove home and tried to sleep. But every time I drifted off, I saw those dark eyes staring at me from across the desk, heard that soft, cultured voice asking what stories I would add to the motel. At 10 p.m., I returned to the last stop. Todd's truck was gone. According to Henry's notes in the logbook, he'd checked out at 9:15 a.m., hours later than his usual departure time. There was no other information, just the checkout time and a notation that he'd left his key on the desk. Henry had already gone home. The motel was quiet with only 3 occupied rooms. The couple in room 7, a single occupant in room 4, and someone new in room 10. Room 13 showed vacant in the system, but the key still wasn't on the rack. I waited until 11:30 p.m., when the motel settled into its nighttime rhythm, then I slipped into the back office. The office was small and cluttered, with metal filing cabinets lining one wall and a desk covered in paperwork and ancient coffee rings. The air smelled of dust and old paper. A single fluorescent tube in the ceiling cast harsh light across everything. I found the filing cabinet Henry had mentioned and pulled open the bottom drawer. Behind folders stuffed with utility bills and maintenance records, my fingers touched something different. A spiral-bound notebook with a water-stained cover. I pulled it out and sat down at the desk. The notebook was old, the pages yellowed at the edges. The handwriting inside was neat and feminine, written in black ink that had faded to gray in places. The first page was dated April 3rd, 2019, almost 6 years ago. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm writing this because I need to remember that I'm not crazy. Henry says the rules will keep me safe, but he won't explain why they exist or what they're protecting me from. So I'm going to document everything. If something happens to me, maybe this will help whoever comes next. I turned the page, my hands trembling slightly. April 7th, 2019. Someone knocked on the back door tonight at 2:45 a.m. 3 times, very deliberate. Rule 1 says never to open it. I didn't. But I looked through the window, and I wish I hadn't. There was nothing there. No person, no animal, nothing. But the knocking continued, and I could see the door rattling in its frame. The shadows outside seemed to move, to condense into shapes that almost looked like hands pressed against the glass. I backed away and stayed at the desk until dawn. Henry asked me if I followed the rules. I said yes. He looked relieved. I flipped through more pages, skimming Sarah's increasingly disturbing observations. She described the phone calls that came after 3 a.m., always showing on the caller ID. She wrote about seeing a tall man in a gray coat standing at the edge of the parking lot, never moving, just watching the motel. She documented guests who checked in and never checked out, whose cars remained in the parking lot for days before someone, Henry, always Henry, towed them away. Then I reached an entry dated August 15th, 2019, and my blood went cold. The last time I opened room 13, and yes, I know Rule 2 says never to tell anyone it's available, but I was new and didn't understand. I found the traveler in a trench coat standing at the foot of the bed. He didn't move when I opened the door, just stood there in the dark room facing the wall. I started to apologize for intruding, but the moment I spoke, he turned his head. Not his body, just his head, rotating impossibly far on his neck until he was looking directly at me. He smiled. "I am what waits in the dark," he said in that soft voice of his. "I am the price of the road, the toll collected from those who forget. Stay away from the back door, stay away from the phone, stay away from me. If you hear knocking, answer only when the clock strikes 3:10. Only then will it be safe to look." Then the door slammed shut on its own, and when I opened it again, the room was empty. But I could smell something like burnt metal and old meat, and the temperature in the room was at least 20 degrees colder than the hallway. Henry found me standing outside room 13 crying. He didn't ask what happened. He just said, "You looked, didn't you?" and led me back to the office. I'm writing this down because I need to remember, this place is wrong. The rules exist for a reason. And that thing in the gray coat is not human and never was. I turned to the next page and found the final entry dated August 22nd, 2019. This will be my last night at the last stop. I gave Henry my notice and he accepted it without argument. He said I lasted longer than most, But I need to write this down because something happened tonight that changed everything. I followed all the rules, every single one. But at 3:10 a.m., not 3, not 3:15, but exactly 3:10, there was tapping at the window. Rule 5 says not to look if I hear tapping after hours. But the traveler had told me that 3:10 was safe, that I should answer then. I was so scared, but I looked. Standing outside the window was a woman I didn't recognize. She was middle-aged, with gray hair and terrified eyes. She was mouthing something, pressing her hands against the glass. I couldn't hear her, but I could read her lips. "Help me, please, don't let it take me." Behind her, barely visible in the darkness, was the man in the gray coat. He was smiling that terrible smile, and as I watched, he placed one long-fingered hand on the woman's shoulder. She went rigid, her eyes going wide and then empty, and then both of them simply vanished. One moment they were there, the next the parking lot was empty. I checked the security footage later. There was no one there, nothing at all. The traveler was showing me what he does, who he takes, and I think he was warning me that if I don't follow the rules, I'll be next. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. I don't know if distance matters, if getting away from this place will be enough. But I have to try. To whoever reads this, the rules are real. The thing in the gray coat is real. And room 13 is not empty. It's never empty. It's where he lives or waits or whatever that thing does between victims. Follow the rules, all of them. Exactly, and if you can, get out before 3:10 a.m. The journal ended there. I flipped through the remaining pages, but they were all blank. I sat in the back office for a long time, staring at Sarah Mitchell's words. Then I carefully placed the journal back in the filing cabinet, exactly where I'd found it, and returned to the front desk. It was 12:47 a.m., the same time I'd first approached the back door last night, the same time everything had started to feel wrong. I pulled out my phone and searched for Sarah Mitchell Route 66 disappearance. Nothing relevant came up. I tried Sarah Mitchell Last Stop Motel, still nothing. Then I tried Disappearances Route 66 2019. The search results were long and disturbing. Dozens of articles about missing persons along the historic highway. Travelers who checked into motels and never checked out. Truckers whose rigs were found abandoned at rest stops. Hitchhikers who vanished between towns. The highway, it seemed, had always been hungry. I was about to close the browser when one article caught my eye. It was from a local New Mexico news site, dated September 2019. Former motel employee found disoriented on Route 66. Sarah Mitchell, 34, was discovered walking along Route 66 approximately 200 miles from her last known location. Mitchell, who recently worked as a night clerk at a Route 66 motel, appeared confused and disoriented when found by passing motorists. She was unable to provide a coherent account of how she'd traveled such a distance or where she'd been for the 3 weeks since her disappearance. Mitchell is currently receiving treatment at an undisclosed facility. Authorities have declined to comment on the ongoing investigation. 3 weeks. She disappeared for 3 weeks after leaving the last stop, then reappeared miles away with no memory of what had happened. I looked up at the clock, 1:15 a.m. The back door remained silent. The phone sat quiet on the desk. But somewhere in room 13 I knew the man in the gray coat was waiting. I didn't sleep that day. I tried, lying in my bed with the curtains drawn, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah Mitchell's handwriting. I am what waits in the dark. I saw Todd's pale face and the blood trickling from his nose. I saw the shape in the security footage, that impossible tall figure that existed for only a few frames before dissolving into static. By the time evening came, I'd made a decision. I needed answers, and Henry was the only person who could provide them. I arrived at the last stop at 7 p.m. 45 minutes before my shift started. Henry's old pickup truck was still in the parking lot, which meant he was working late. I found him in the back office, hunched over a desk calculator, tallying receipts by hand. He looked up when I knocked on the doorframe. "You're early." "I read the journal," I said without preamble. "Sarah Mitchell's journal. You told me to find it." Henry set down his pencil slowly and leaned back in his chair. For a moment, he looked older than his years, the fluorescent light casting deep shadows under his eyes. And I need you to tell me what's really happening here." I stepped into the office and closed the door behind me. No more deflections, no more just follow the rules. I deserve to know what I'm dealing with. "You think you deserve answers?" Henry's voice was quiet but not unkind. Sarah thought the same thing. So did Marcus before her and Jennifer before him. Everyone who works nights here eventually wants to understand, to make sense of it. He shook his head. "Understanding doesn't keep you safe. Following the rules does." "Then why did you tell me about the journal?" "Because you've started asking the right questions," Henry said. He gestured to the empty chair across from his desk. "Sit down, Sam. You're not going to like what I tell you." I sat. Henry was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant, as if looking at something only he could see. "The last stop has been here since 1962, he began. Built by a man named Arthur Marsh, who wanted to capitalize on the Route 66 tourist boom. He picked this location because it was exactly halfway between Amarillo and Albuquerque, a perfect place for travelers to stop for the night. The motel did well for about 6 months. Henry pulled open a drawer and took out an old photograph. It showed the last stop in its heyday. The neon sign, bright and new. The parking lot full of gleaming chrome and tail fins. "Then people started disappearing," Henry continued. "Not many at first, one guest every few months. The police investigated, but they couldn't find any evidence of foul play. No bodies, no signs of struggle. People just checked in and never checked out. Their cars would sit in the parking lot for days until someone finally towed them away." "What happened to them?" I asked. Arthur thought it was bad luck, random chance. Route 66 was still dangerous in those days. Long stretches of empty desert, bad weather, mechanical problems. People disappeared along the highway all the time. Henry's jaw tightened. But then Arthur's night clerk disappeared. A young man named David something. The records are unclear. David was there when Arthur locked up at midnight and gone when Arthur returned at 7 a.m. His car was still in the lot. His wallet was still in his jacket, hanging on the coat rack behind the desk. He'd simply vanished. "The gray coat man," I said. Henry nodded slowly. Arthur saw him for the first time that week. A tall man in an old-fashioned trench coat standing at the edge of the property at dusk. Arthur called out to him, asked if he needed a room. The man smiled and said, "I already have one." Then he walked toward the motel and disappeared into room 13. I felt my skin prickle. Room 13. Arthur checked the records. Room 13 had been vacant for 3 days. He went to investigate and found the door locked from the inside. When he finally got it open, the room was empty, but it was freezing cold and there was a smell like... Henry paused. Sarah described it as burnt metal and old meat. Arthur described it as the smell of a road that goes nowhere. "What is it?" I asked. "What is that thing?" Henry was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "The road takes, Sam. That's what it does. It's always taken. Travelers disappearing in the desert, wagons vanishing in the 1800s, cars found abandoned with the engine still running. Route 66 is old, older than the highway itself. It follows an ancient trading route that the indigenous peoples used for centuries. Before that, it was something else. A path that goes back further than any record can trace. He looked at me with those tired, haunted eyes. The thing in the gray coat is what the road became. Or maybe it's what was always there and the road just gave it form. Arthur spent years trying to understand it, trying to fight it. He closed the motel for a while, but people still disappeared from the parking lot. He had the place blessed by priests from 3 different denominations. Didn't matter. The thing kept taking. Then how do you stop it? I asked. You don't. Henry's answer was flat and final. Arthur learned that the hard way. But he did discover something. The thing has rules of its own, limitations. It can't just take anyone it wants. There are boundaries, conditions that have to be met. The rules, I said, understanding dawning. The rules we follow, they're the thing's limitations. Arthur spent the last years of his life documenting those boundaries. Every time someone disappeared, he'd note what they were doing, where they were, what time it was. He found the patterns, the back door, that's the threshold. Opening it after midnight is an invitation, a way of saying yes to something that's always waiting outside. The phone calls after 3 a.m. Those are the thing reaching out, trying to make contact. Answering gives it a connection to you. And engaging in conversation with it, I added. Like Todd did. Henry's expression darkened. Todd called me this afternoon. He couldn't remember most of last night, but he said he's been seeing something in his rearview mirror since he left. A tall figure in a gray coat, always there when he glances back, always gone when he looks again. He paused. He's not going to outrun it. The weight of that statement settled over the office like a physical presence. I thought about Todd's casual dismissal of the rules, his laugh when he'd called them superstition. How long have you been working here? I asked. 23 years, Henry said. I started as a day manager, then took over full-time when the previous owner died. I've seen... He trailed off, shaking his head. I've seen things I can't explain to anyone who hasn't worked here. I've watched good people make small mistakes and disappear. I've watched the thing in the gray coat stand in the parking lot and smile as it waits for someone to slip up. Why do you stay? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He looked down at his hands, at the age spots and calluses, the evidence of decades spent maintaining this cursed place. Because someone has to, he said quietly. If this place closes, the thing doesn't go away. It's tied to this location, this specific mile of Route 66. If there's no motel here, no one to warn travelers, no one enforcing the rules, it just takes freely. At least this way, there's a chance. People who follow the rules survive. Not all of them, but most. That's better than nothing. Sarah Mitchell, I said. What really happened to her? She followed the rules, Henry said, every single one. But she looked out the window at 3:10 like the thing told her to. And she saw what it does to the people who break the rules, how it collects them, uses them. That knowledge. He shook his head. Sarah couldn't handle it. She quit, just like she wrote in her journal. But 3 days after she left, she called me from somewhere in Arizona, crying. She said she could feel it following her, that every mirror showed a reflection that wasn't quite right. Every shadow looked like it might be hiding something tall and thin. The news article said she was missing for 3 weeks. She was, Henry confirmed. I don't know where she went during that time, no one does. But when they found her, she couldn't remember anything after making that phone call to me. Whatever happened in those 3 weeks. He didn't finish the sentence. I sat in silence, processing everything Henry had told me. The ancient path, the thing that had become bound to it, the rules that were the only barrier between survival and whatever fate Todd was now facing. The tapping on the window, I said. Rule 5 says never to look, but the thing told Sarah that 3:10 was safe. It was lying, Henry said flatly. Or maybe not lying, maybe offering a choice. Look at 310 and see the truth, see what it does, see the people it's taken. That knowledge might drive you mad, might make you easier to claim later. Or don't look and remain ignorant but safer. He met my eyes. The thing is old, Sam. It understands people. It knows that sometimes the cruelest thing you can do is show someone the truth. Rule 2, I said. Room 13. Why tell people it's occupied when it's not? Because it's never actually vacant, Henry said. That room is where the thing lives when it's not hunting. If someone checks into room 13... He stopped, his face going pale at some memory. Don't ever let anyone check into room 13. No matter what they say, no matter how much they insist, it's occupied. Always. The office felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in. I thought about the security camera feed showing room 13 as nothing but static and shadow. I thought about Sarah's journal entry, about the thing standing at the foot of the bed, its head rotating impossibly to face her. What happened to Arthur Marsh? I asked. The original owner. Henry's expression went carefully neutral. He disappeared in 1984. His car was found in the parking lot, keys still in the ignition, engine running. The night clerk at the time said Arthur had been acting strange for weeks, talking about how he'd finally figured out the thing's true nature, how he was going to end it once and for all. He paused. Whatever he tried, it didn't work. They never found his body. Do you think he's dead? I think that's probably the best-case scenario, Henry said quietly. The clock on the wall showed 7:43 p.m. Almost time for my shift to start. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff, my mind reeling with everything Henry had told me. One more question, I said. Why do you keep hiring people for the night shift? If you know how dangerous it is, why not do it yourself? Why risk other people's lives? Henry looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between guilt and resignation. I'm 68 years old, Sam. I've been doing this for 23 years, and it's worn me down to nothing. I need the help. He stood up and moved toward the door. But I only hire people who are desperate enough to need the job badly and smart enough to follow instructions. You qualified on both counts. He paused in the doorway, his hand on the frame. You can quit anytime you want. Walk away and don't look back. I won't think less of you. But if you stay, remember what I told you. Understanding doesn't keep you safe. Only the rules do. Follow them exactly and you have a chance. Break even one. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Henry left me there in the back office, surrounded by old receipts and the weight of decades of horror. I thought about quitting, about walking out to my car and driving away and never coming back, about finding a different job, any job, no matter how bad the pay or hours. But I thought about Todd, seeing that tall figure in his rearview mirror. I thought about Sarah Mitchell, lost for 3 weeks in some space between here and there. I thought about all the people who disappeared along this stretch of Route 66, their cars found empty, their fates unknown. Someone had to work the night shift. Someone had to be here to warn people, to enforce the rules, to maintain the fragile barrier between the living and the thing that waited in the dark. I took the folded paper from my pocket and read through the rules one more time, committing every word to memory. Then I walked out to the front desk and began my shift. It was 8 p.m. 4 hours until midnight. 4 hours until the rules really mattered. 4 hours until I'd find out if I was strong enough to survive. The first few hours of my shift passed without incident. A family checked into room 8 around 9:30, weary from driving through the desert heat. A middle-aged couple took room 4 at 10:15, asking about the best route to the Grand Canyon. Normal guests with normal questions, their faces showing nothing but ordinary travel fatigue. I processed their payments and handed over their keys, and for a brief window of time I could almost pretend that the last stop was just another roadside motel, that the rules folded in my pocket were nothing more than Henry's eccentricities. But as midnight approached, the familiar dread began to settle over the lobby like fog. The fluorescent lights seemed dimmer somehow, casting shadows that moved wrong. The air grew heavy and difficult to breathe. Outside, the neon sign flickered in its eternal rhythm, and beyond the parking lot, the desert stretched away into absolute darkness. At 12:47 a.m., the same time as the previous nights, I found myself staring at the back door, waiting. But it remained silent. No knocking, no sounds at all. I checked the security monitors. The parking lot showed 5 vehicles: the family's minivan, the couple's sedan, 2 others belonging to long-term guests, and a rental car I hadn't noticed earlier. All the rooms showed normal activity or sleeping occupants. Except room 13, the feed from that camera was still corrupted, showing nothing but gray static, occasionally punctuated by darker shapes that might have been furniture or might have been something else entirely. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of the shadows until my eyes started to hurt. At 1:30 a.m., I made coffee in the small break room, trying to stay alert. The old machine gurgled and hissed, and the sound was comforting in its mundanity. I was pouring the coffee into a styrofoam cup when I heard the lobby door chime. A woman stood just inside the entrance, and my breath caught in my throat. She was in her 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing jeans and a blue windbreaker. But it was her expression that stopped me. The wide-eyed terror barely contained beneath a veneer of forced calm. She looked like someone who'd been running for a long time and had finally run out of road. "I need a room," she said. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the tremor underneath. "Please, just for a few hours." I set down my coffee and moved behind the desk. "Of course, let me just—" "Room 13, she interrupted. "I need room 13 specifically." Every muscle in my body went rigid. I looked at her more carefully, noting the shadows under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she placed them on the counter, the way she kept glancing toward the window, as if expecting to see something outside. Rule 2. If someone asks for room 13, tell them it's occupied, even if it's not. "I'm sorry," I said, keeping my voice level. "Room 13 is occupied." "No, it's not." Her voice rose slightly. "I can see your system from here. It shows vacant." She was right. The computer screen clearly displayed room 13's status as available. But I thought about Sarah Mitchell's journal entry, about opening that door and finding the thing in the gray coat standing at the foot of the bed. About Henry's warning, "It's never actually vacant." "The system is wrong," I said firmly. "Room 13 is occupied. I have other rooms available. Room 6 is very nice, quiet, away from the—" "I need room 13. She was leaning across the counter now, her eyes locked on mine with desperate intensity. "Please, you don't understand. I have to get into that room. I have to—" She stopped abruptly, her expression shifting to something that might have been confusion or pain. "I need to be there. It's the only safe place." My mind raced. This woman was clearly in distress, possibly in danger. Every human instinct screamed at me to help her, to give her what she was asking for. But the rules were absolute, and I'd seen what happened when they were broken. "I can't give you room 13, I said quietly. "But I can call someone for you, the police, a friend, anyone you need." "Are you in some kind of trouble?" She stared at me for a long moment, then slowly shook her head. "You can't help me," she whispered. "No one can. I thought maybe if I could just get to that room, if I could be where it lives, maybe it would stop following me. Maybe it would take me quickly instead of—" She trailed off, her eyes going distant. "Instead of what?" I asked. though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Instead of making it last, she said. Instead of stretching it out over weeks and months, always there in the corner of my eye, always waiting. I broke the rules at another place, another motel 200 miles west of here. I didn't know. No one warned me, and now it won't leave me alone. My blood went cold. The man in the gray coat, her face went even paler. You've seen him too. I work here, I said. I know the rules, I follow them. Lucky you. She laughed, a broken sound that held no humor. I didn't get a list of rules. I just checked in and someone knocked on my door at 3 a.m. and I opened it because I thought it was the manager or another guest, and there he was, standing in the hallway smiling that terrible smile. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. He said, "Thank you for the invitation." Then he just walked away. But since that night, he's everywhere. In my rearview mirror, standing outside my apartment window, reflected in store windows, always watching, always waiting. I can't sleep, I can't think. I can feel him getting closer, and I know that eventually he's going to reach out and touch me, and when he does... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I thought about Todd, about his pale face and the blood dripping from his nose, about Sarah Mitchell lost for 3 weeks in some impossible space. Room 13 won't help you, I said gently. That's where it lives. Going there would be like walking into its arms. Good, she whispered. At least then it would be over. We stood there in silence, the only sound the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of a truck passing on the highway. I wanted to help her, wanted to offer some solution that would save her from the fate she was describing. But I knew there was nothing I could do. She'd broken the rules and the thing in the gray coat had marked her. Go, I said finally. Drive away from here and keep driving. Get as far from Route 66 as you can. Maybe distance matters. Maybe if you get far enough away... It doesn't matter, she interrupted. But thank you for trying. She turned toward the door, then paused. Follow your rules, she said without looking back. Don't ever break them, not even once. Not even for someone you love. Then she was gone, the door chiming softly as it closed. I watched through the window as she climbed into the rental car, the one I'd noticed earlier on the security feed, and drove away. Her taillights disappeared into the darkness and I was alone again. I checked the clock, 2:18 a.m. The back door remained silent. The phone sat quiet on the desk. But I couldn't shake the image of that woman's desperate face, the way she'd begged for room 13 as if being consumed by the thing in the gray coat was preferable to being stalked by it. At 2:45 a.m. I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came from the window beside the front desk, soft but distinct. 3 measured taps, exactly like the knocking on the back door. I froze, my hand hovering over the keyboard where I'd been pretending to work. Rule 5. If you hear tapping on your window after hours, don't look. Another 3 taps, slightly louder this time. I kept my eyes fixed on the computer screen, seeing nothing but my own reflection in the darkened monitor. My heart hammered in my chest. Tap, tap, tap. Sam! The voice came from outside the window, muffled by the glass but perfectly clear. A woman's voice, frightened and urgent. Sam! Please, I need help. It was the woman from earlier, the one who'd wanted room 13. Every instinct screamed at me to look, to see if she was okay, to help. Tap, tap, tap. Please, the voice continued. He's out here, the man in the coat. He's coming for me. Please open the door. Please let me in. My hands were shaking. I gripped the edge of the desk, focusing on the wood grain, on the worn spot where decades of employees had rested their arms. I thought about Sarah Mitchell's journal entry about how she'd looked at 3:10 and seen the woman being taken. The clock showed 2:52 a.m. Sam, I'm begging you. The voice was crying now, desperate. Don't leave me out here with it, please. I'm so scared. The voice cut off abruptly, replaced by a sound I'd heard before, that soft, cultured voice with its indeterminate accent. Hello? Sam, the thing in the gray coat said from just outside the window. I can hear your heartbeat through the glass. Such a rapid, frantic rhythm. You're afraid. Don't respond. Don't engage. Don't look. The woman is gone now, it continued conversationally. Collected, cataloged, stored. She broke the rules, you see. Opened a door she shouldn't have opened. And now she's part of the road, just another mile marker in the endless dark. Tap, tap, tap. But you've been good, Sam. You followed the rules so carefully. I appreciate that. It makes the game more interesting when someone actually knows how to play. There was a pause, and I could almost hear it smiling. Although I notice you're not looking at me, why is that? Don't you want to see? Don't you want to understand? I closed my eyes, even though I wasn't looking at the window anyway. I focused on my breathing, on staying still, on not responding. Henry told you about the limitations, didn't he? The voice continued. About how I can't just take anyone I want. How there have to be conditions, invitations, breaches. It's true. The old powers that bound me to this place also bound me with rules. Isn't that ironic? We're both following rules, you and I, both dancing to an ancient tune. The tapping came again, harder this time. But here's what Henry didn't tell you, it said. And now the voice was directly against the glass, so close I could hear the words vibrating through the window. The rules protect you from me, yes. But they don't protect you from yourself. Eventually, Sam, you'll make a mistake. You'll forget which rule applies, or you'll second-guess yourself, or you'll try to save someone who's already beyond saving. Everyone breaks eventually. Everyone opens the wrong door. I checked the clock. 2:59 a.m. 1 minute until the phone rings, the voice whispered. I wonder if you'll answer it. I wonder what you'll hear if you do. Then silence. The tapping stopped. The voice went quiet. I sat perfectly still, my entire body tense, waiting. At exactly 3 a.m. the phone rang. Rule 4. If the phone rings after 3 a.m., don't answer it. It's not for you. I watched the red light blink with each ring, watched the caller ID display show its impossible string of zeros. The phone rang 5 times, then 6, then 7, far more than any normal caller would wait. On the 10th ring, it stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. No tapping, no voice. No sound except my own breathing and the hum of the lights. I slowly opened my eyes and allowed myself to look at the clock. 3:02 a.m. I'd followed the rules. I'd survived. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I couldn't erase the sound of that woman's voice from my mind, begging me to let her in. Had she really been outside? Or had it been the thing in the gray coat mimicking her voice, trying to trick me into looking? I'd never know. And that uncertainty felt like its own form of torture. I thought about what the thing had said. Eventually, you'll make a mistake. It was right. I was human, fallible, capable of error. How long could I work here, night after night, following these rules with perfect precision before I slipped? Before exhaustion or compassion or simple forgetfulness caused me to break just one rule? And what would happen when I did? The rest of the night passed in agonizing slowness. I didn't move from behind the desk. I kept my eyes away from the window. When 6 a.m. finally came and the sky began to lighten, I felt as if I'd aged years in a single night. Henry arrived at 7:45, punctual as always. He took one look at my face and sighed. What happened? A woman came in, I said, my voice hoarse from hours of silence. She wanted room 13. I told her it was occupied. She said she'd broken the rules at another motel and the thing was following her. Rebecca Marsh, Henry said quietly. She called here yesterday afternoon asking about room 13. I told her never to come here. I told her it wouldn't help. He shook his head. Did she leave? Yes, but later. I stopped, unsure how to explain. It was outside the window, the thing. It was talking to me. But you didn't look. No. Then you're fine, Henry said, but his expression suggested otherwise. Go home, Sam. Get some rest. I gathered my things and headed for the door, but Henry called after me. Sam, the fact that it's talking to you directly, that's not a good sign. It means you've caught its attention. It's studying you, learning your patterns. Be extra careful with the rules from now on. Don't give it any openings. I drove home through the morning light, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from just beyond my peripheral vision. Every time I glanced in my rearview mirror, I half expected to see a tall figure in a gray coat standing in the road behind me. But there was nothing. Just empty highway and desert scrub and the rising sun. I tried to sleep, but every time I drifted off, I heard that soft, cultured voice whispering, "Eventually you'll make a mistake." I didn't go back that night. I couldn't. I lay in my apartment all day staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of my neighbors moving around in the units above and beside me. Normal sounds, human sounds, evidence of a world where things like the man in the gray coat didn't exist. Around 5 p.m., my phone rang. Henry's number appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 6:30, again at 7 almost. I turned off my phone and sat in the darkness of my bedroom, wondering if I was fired or if Henry was just worried, wondering if I was a coward for not going back. Around 10 p.m., someone knocked on my apartment door. I ignored it, but the knocking continued, not aggressive, just persistent. Finally, Murtidude. I looked through the peephole. Henry stood in the hallway, his hands in his pockets, looking tired and old under the fluorescent lights. I opened the door. I can't do it anymore, I said before he could speak. I'm sorry, I know you need the help, but I can't. Todd Greeley is dead, Henry interrupted quietly. The words hung in the air between us. I stepped back and Henry took it as an invitation to enter. He moved past me into the small living room and sat down heavily on my second-hand couch. His truck was found this morning on a service road about 40 miles from the last stop, Henry continued. Engine still running. No sign of struggle, no body. He looked up at me with those exhausted eyes. But there was blood on the driver's seat, not much. Just a few drops on the headrest. And the police found something else. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph. It took my brain a moment to process what I was seeing. The interior of Todd's truck, the leather seat and steering wheel illuminated by camera flash. And there, written in what looked like condensation on the inside of the windshield, was a message. He engaged in conversation. The police think it's connected to other disappearances along Route 66, Henry said. They're treating it as a serial abduction case. They don't understand that the rules apply everywhere along this stretch of highway, not just at the motel. The thing isn't confined to the last stop. It's tied to the entire path. I sat down on the floor, my legs suddenly weak. Todd had seemed so solid, so dismissive of anything supernatural. And now he was gone, taken by the thing he'd refused to believe in. There's something else, Henry said. Rebecca Marsh, the woman who came to the motel last night, they found her car abandoned about 60 miles east. Same condition as Todd's. Engine running, no body, no evidence except... He paused. Except her phone. It was on the passenger seat and she'd been recording voice memos. The police played them for me, trying to figure out if I'd seen her. And, my voice came out as a whisper. The last recording is from 3:14 this morning. She's crying, saying she can see something in her rearview mirror. Something tall and thin. She says it's getting closer. that it's reaching toward her, and then Henry's jaw tightened. Then she screams, and there's a sound like static, and the recording ends. I thought about her desperate face when she'd begged me for room 13, about how she'd said it would be better if it was over quickly. I shouldn't have sent her away, I said. You did exactly what the rules require, Henry replied firmly. Letting her into room 13 wouldn't have saved her. It would have just given the thing what it wanted sooner. At least she had those extra hours. Hours of being stalked and terrified. Better than the alternative. I looked at Henry, at the weight he carried in his shoulders, the toll of 23 years of watching people disappear. Why are you here? Why aren't you at the motel? I closed it tonight, he said. First time in 15 years. I put up a no vacancy sign and locked the doors because... He hesitated. Because something's changed. The thing is more active than I've ever seen it. 2 people taken in the span of 24 hours. It's never moved that fast before. And the way it talked to you directly, the way it's escalating, I think it's building toward something. Toward what? I don't know, Henry admitted. But I came here to tell you that you don't have to come back. I'm serious, Sam. You can walk away. I'll find someone else. This isn't worth your life. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to thank him and close the door and never think about the last stop again. But I couldn't stop thinking about the woman's face, about Todd's casual dismissal of the rules, about Sarah Mitchell writing in her journal that understanding the truth hadn't helped her at all. If I quit, I said slowly, you'll hire someone else. Someone who won't have my experience, who won't know the rules as well as I do. And they might make a mistake faster than I would. That's not your responsibility. Then whose is it? I stood up, feeling something settle into place inside my chest. Not courage exactly, but a kind of resignation. You said yourself that someone has to maintain the barrier. Someone has to be there to enforce the rules. If not me, then who? Henry studied me for a long moment. You're sure? No, I said honestly, but I'm coming back anyway. We drove to the last stop together, Henry following my car in his truck. The sun had set and the highway stretched ahead of us like a black ribbon, the white lines reflecting in my headlights. The motel appeared in the distance, its neon sign dark, the parking lot empty. It looked different with the lights off, smaller somehow, more vulnerable. Just an old building in the desert fighting against time and decay and something far older than either. Henry unlocked the office and we went inside together. He turned on only the essential lights, leaving the lobby dimmer than usual. I'm staying tonight, he announced. In the back office, you're not doing this alone. You don't have to. Yes, I do. His tone left no room for argument. Besides, I want to see what happens, what it does when you come back. I took my position behind the desk and pulled out the folded paper, smoothing it across the counter. The rules looked the same as always, but now each word felt heavier, freighted with the weight of Todd's disappearance and Rebecca Marsh's final scream. Midnight came and went. The back door remained silent. The phone didn't ring. The motel felt different tonight, expectant, like the air before a thunderstorm. At 2:33 a.m., the lights flickered. I looked at Henry, who'd emerged from the back office. His expression was grim. Stay behind the desk, he said. Don't move, don't respond, just... The front door opened. The man in the gray coat stood in the entrance, backlit by the parking lot's single functioning streetlight. He was exactly as I remembered. Impossibly tall, impossibly thin, wearing that ancient trench coat that seemed to be woven from shadows. His face was pale and ageless, and his eyes reflected the fluorescent light like an animal's. He smiled. Hello, Sam, he said in that soft, cultured voice. Hello, Henry. It's been such a long time since we've had a proper conversation, hasn't it? Henry's face had gone white, but his voice was steady. You're not welcome here. But I have a room, the thing replied, taking a step inside. Room 13. I've always had a room, and Sam knows the rules. He can't deny me my accommodation. I stood frozen, my mind racing through the rules. Nothing explicitly said what to do if the thing in the gray coat tried to check in. Nothing covered this situation. He's not checking in, Henry said. He doesn't need to. He already has access to room 13. True, the thing agreed, taking another step closer. But I find myself curious about our young Sam here. He's been so diligent, so careful. He's lasted longer than most without breaking a single rule. That kind of discipline is rare, impressive even. It was now standing directly in front of the desk, close enough that I could see my reflection in its dark eyes. Close enough to smell that scent Sarah Mitchell had described. Burnt metal and old meat, the smell of a road that goes nowhere. "What do you want?" I heard myself ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The thing's smile widened. Want? I want what I've always wanted. To collect the toll. To gather the lost and the unwary. To feed on the moment when hope transforms into understanding. When someone realizes they've broken the rules and there's no going back. It tilted its head, studying me. But you haven't broken the rules, Sam. You've been perfect. And that presents a problem. What kind of problem? Henry asked from behind me. The kind where the game becomes boring, it replied. Where the prey is too cautious, too aware. It's no fun when they don't make mistakes. Its eyes locked onto mine. So I'm going to give you a choice, Sam. A way to make things more interesting. Don't listen to it, Henry said urgently. Whatever it offers, it's a trap. The thing in the gray coat ignored him. Someone is going to die tonight, Sam. That's already decided. The road requires its toll and the scales must balance. But you can choose who pays. My blood went cold. What are you talking about? It gestured toward the back office. Henry has been maintaining this place for 23 years. He's old, tired, worn down by the weight of protecting others. He's ready to rest even if he won't admit it. If you open the back door right now, break Rule 1, I'll take Henry. Quick and painless. He'll simply stop existing and you'll be free to leave this place and never come back. No, I said immediately. Or, it continued, you can maintain your perfect record. Follow the rules exactly as you have been. And at 3:10 a.m. and when the tapping comes, I'll make sure someone else is standing outside that window. Someone you might know. A family member, perhaps. Or a friend from college. Someone who will beg for help while you follow Rule 5 and refuse to look. That's impossible, I said. You can't just bring people here. Can't I? Its smile was terrible. The road goes everywhere, Sam. It connects every location, every moment. I am the road and the road is me. All I need is a name and I can bring anyone to this parking lot, anyone at all. Henry grabbed my shoulder. It's lying. This is what it does. It offers false choices, tries to make you break the rules voluntarily. Don't believe it. Am I lying, Henry? The thing turned its attention to the older man. You've seen me take so many people over the years. You know what I can do. You know the rules have limitations, that there are cracks in the protection they offer. It looked back at me. So choose, Sam. Break one rule to save Henry and free yourself. Or follow the rules perfectly and risk losing someone you actually care about. The clock showed 2:47 a.m., 23 minutes until 3:10. My mind raced, trying to find a way out, a loophole, anything. But the thing's logic was airtight. If I broke Rule 1 and opened the back door, I'd be violating the rules and giving it permission to take someone. If I followed Rule 5 and didn't look when the tapping came at 3:10, I'd be condemning whoever it brought here to the same fate as Rebecca Marsh. Unless I could find a third option. What if I quit right now? I asked. What if I just walk out and never come back? Then Henry dies tonight when he's here alone, it replied immediately. And the next person he hires will face the same choice. The cycle continues. There's no escape, Sam, only choices, all of them terrible. I looked at Henry, whose face had gone from white to gray. He looked older than his 68 years, older than any human should look. And I realized the thing was right about one thing. Henry was exhausted. He'd spent more than 2 decades carrying this burden, watching people disappear, enforcing rules he hadn't created against a thing he couldn't defeat. "Don't do it," Henry said quietly, reading my thoughts. "Don't break the rules for me. I've made my peace with this place. I knew what I was risking every night I worked here." "But I didn't," I said. "I took this job because I needed money. I stayed because I thought I could help. But I never signed up to choose who lives and dies." "Nobody ever does," the thing in the gray coat said. "That's what makes it interesting." The clock showed 2:53 a.m. I thought about all the people who disappeared along this stretch of Route 66. About Arthur Marsh, who tried to fight the thing and vanished. About Sarah Mitchell, who'd seen the truth and been broken by it. About Todd and Rebecca and countless others who'd broken the rules and paid the price. And I thought about the rules themselves, the arbitrary limitations that somehow held this thing at bay. Rules written by someone, enforced by belief powerful enough to create a barrier between the living and whatever the thing in the gray coat really was. That's when I understood. "You can't actually break the rules," I said slowly. "Can you?" The thing's smile faltered just for a moment. "The rules aren't just protection for us," I continued, the pieces falling into place in my mind. "They're constraints on you. You can't take anyone who follows them perfectly. You can only take people who break them voluntarily. That's why you need us to choose. Why you're offering this false dilemma. Because you can't actually force anything." Henry's expression shifted from resignation to something like hope. "Sam's right," he said. "In 23 years, I've never seen you take anyone who followed the rules. Never. You can threaten, you can offer choices, you can manipulate, but you can't actually break your own limitations." The thing's face remained pleasant. But something had changed in its eyes. Something cold and ancient and very, very angry. "Clever," it said softly. "So what will you do with that information, Sam? Will you hide behind the rules forever? Will you spend your life afraid to make a single mistake, knowing I'm always waiting?" "If that's what it takes," I said. The clock showed 2:59 a.m. "We'll see," the thing said. "The night isn't over yet. And you humans are so very fragile, so prone to error. I can be patient, Sam. I have all the time in the world." At exactly 3 a.m. the phone rang. I didn't answer it. The thing in the gray coat stood watching me, its head tilted as the phone rang and rang and rang. On the 10th ring it stopped. Silence filled the lobby. The thing remained perfectly still, like a statue, like something that had never been alive and never would be. Then at 3:10 a.m. the tapping came. Tap, tap, tap. On the window beside the desk. I kept my eyes forward on the thing standing in front of me, watching its terrible smile as it waited for me to look. "Don't you want to see who it is?" it whispered. "Don't you want to know if I brought someone you love?" I didn't move, didn't respond, didn't look. The tapping continued for what felt like an eternity. Behind me, I heard Henry's steady breathing. In front of me, the thing in the gray coat waited. At 3:18 a.m., the tapping stopped. The thing's smile faded. "Interesting," it said. Then it turned and walked toward the hallway, toward room 13, its footsteps making no sound. It paused at the entrance to the corridor and looked back at me one last time. "This isn't over, Sam. You'll make a mistake eventually, everyone does, and when you do, I'll be waiting." Then it was gone, disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. I checked the security monitor and watched as the thing entered room 13. The moment it crossed the threshold, the camera feed cleared, showing a normal, empty motel room. Henry let out a long, shaky breath. "You did it," he said. "You called its bluff." "It'll come back," I said. "Probably," Henry agreed. "No, but not tonight. Tonight you won." The rest of the shift passed without incident. At 6 a.m., the sky began to lighten, and the motel returned to its mundane daytime self. When I checked the system, room 13 showed vacant once again, but the key still wasn't on the rack. I didn't quit. Part of me wanted to walk away from the last stop and never look back. But I kept thinking about what would happen to the next person Henry hired, about the cycle the thing in the gray coat had described. Someone had to know the rules. Someone had to enforce the barrier. So I stayed. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. I worked the night shift at the last stop, following the rules with meticulous precision. The back door remained closed after midnight. I never told anyone room 13 was available. When the phone rang after 3 a.m., I let it ring. When I heard tapping at the window, I never looked. The thing in the gray coat appeared occasionally, always testing, always watching. Sometimes it would stand in the parking lot at dusk, just visible in the dying light. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of it on the security footage, a tall shadow moving past the cameras. Once I found a gray button on the front desk, the kind that might have come from an old trench coat. I threw it in the trash. Henry and I developed a routine. He worked days, I worked nights, and we left notes for each other about anything unusual. Guest complaints, maintenance issues, sightings of the thing. It became almost normal in a terrible way. But I could feel it wearing on me. The constant vigilance, the knowledge that a single mistake could be fatal. I stopped sleeping well during the day, haunted by dreams of knocking doors and ringing phones. I stopped making plans more than a week in advance, unsure if I'd still be alive to keep them. 3 months after the night of the choice, a young man came in for a job interview. Henry had posted an ad for a second night clerk, someone to give me nights off, to prevent the exhaustion that led to mistakes. The kid's name was Marcus Chen, 24 years old, fresh out of school with a degree in hospitality management and absolutely no job prospects. I recognized the desperation in his eyes. It was the same desperation I'd had when I first walked through the door. Henry hired him on the spot. I trained Marcus for 2 weeks, teaching him the computer system, the check-in process, the security cameras, and on his final training shift at 11:45 p.m., I handed him the folded paper. "These are the rules," I said, watching his face as he read them. I saw the same skepticism I'd felt, the same dismissive amusement. "Is this serious?" he asked. "Completely," I replied, echoing Henry's words from months before. "Read them. Memorize them. Follow them exactly." "But what do they mean? Why can't I—" "You don't need to understand them," I interrupted. "You just need to follow them. Every single one, every single night. No exceptions." Marcus looked at me, and I saw the same question in his eyes that I'd had. Is this guy serious, or is this some weird hazing ritual? "What happens if I don't?" he asked. I thought about Todd Greeley, about Rebecca Marsh, about Sarah Mitchell and Arthur Marsh, and everyone else who'd broken the rules. I thought about the thing in the gray coat, eternally patient, eternally hungry. "You won't last long enough to ask me that question again," I said. I left him there with the rules just as Henry had left me. As I walked to my car, I glanced back at the motel. The neon sign flickered in its eternal rhythm. The windows glowed with warm light. It looked almost welcoming, almost safe. But I knew better. I knew what waited in room 13. I knew what stood outside the back door after midnight. I knew what called on the phone at 3 a.m. and what tapped at the window at 3:10. I knew the rules, and I knew the cost of breaking them. 3 months later, Marcus quit. He lasted longer than most. Henry told me the average was 6 weeks, but eventually the strain became too much. He handed in his notice after a night when something had scratched at the back door for 4 straight hours, never stopping, never speaking, just that constant scraping sound. "I can't do this anymore," he told me, his hands shaking. "I can't spend every night waiting for something terrible to happen. I can't live like this." I didn't try to change his mind. I understood completely. Henry hired someone new, and then someone after that, and someone after that. The last stop went through night clerks like other businesses went through paper towels. Most quit within a month. A few lasted longer. One broke Rule 4 and answered the phone, and we never saw her again. Her car sat in the parking lot for 3 days before the police towed it away. But I stayed. Months turned into a year turned into 2. I became the senior night clerk, the one who trained the new hires, the one who handed them the folded paper and watched skepticism turn to belief. I became Henry. On the 2-year anniversary of my first shift, Henry took me aside during the handoff. We stood in the parking lot watching the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. "You could leave," he said quietly. "You've done more than anyone could ask. You've earned the right to walk away." "So could you," I replied. He smiled, sad and tired. "I'm 69 years old, Sam. Where would I go? What would I do? This place is my life now, for better or worse." He looked at me. "But you're still young. You could have a real career, a real life, one that doesn't involve spending every night waiting for something to go wrong." I thought about it, tried to imagine myself in a normal job, in a normal apartment, living a normal life. But I couldn't picture it anymore. The rules had become part of me, woven into my thoughts and habits. Even during the day in my own apartment, I found myself following them. I never opened my door after midnight without checking first. I didn't answer my phone after 3 a.m. When I heard tapping at my window, I turned away. "I can't leave," I said finally. "Because if I do, you'll hire someone else. Someone who might not be as careful, who might make a mistake faster. And their death would be on me." "That's not how it works," Henry said. "Isn't it?" He didn't have an answer for that. The sun finished setting, and the desert plunged into darkness. The neon sign flickered to life behind us, its turquoise glow painting long shadows across the parking lot. My shift was about to begin. "Be careful tonight," Henry said, the same thing he said every night. "Follow the rules." "Always," I replied. I walked into the lobby, took my position behind the desk, and pulled out the folded paper. The creases were worn soft now, the ink slightly faded, but the words remained as absolute as ever. Rule 1. Never open the back door after midnight, no matter what you hear. Rule 2. If someone asks for room 13, tell them it's occupied, even if it's not. Rule 3. Do not engage in conversation with the lone traveler in the gray trench coat. Rule 4. If the phone rings after 3 a.m., don't answer it. It's not for you. Rule 5. If you hear tapping on your window after hours, don't look. I read them one more time, though I had them memorized. Then I placed the paper beside the keyboard and waited for midnight. Somewhere in room 13, the thing in the gray coat was waiting too. It was always waiting. It would always be waiting. That was its nature, just as following the rules had become mine. The clock ticked forward. Guests checked in and out. The desert night stretched on, vast and dark and full of things that travelers were never meant to see. And I sat at my desk, following the rules, maintaining the barrier, keeping the toll collector at bay. One night at a time, forever if necessary. Because someone had to. Because the road was hungry, because the rules were the only thing standing between the living and the thing that waited in the dark. At 2:33 a.m., I heard the first knock on the back door. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't move. I didn't look. I followed the rules, just like always, just like I would for the rest of my life. The knocking continued, patient and persistent, as the fluorescent lights hummed overhead and the neon sign flickered outside and the desert darkness pressed against the windows like a physical weight. And in room 13, something that wore a gray coat and smiled with too many teeth waited for me to make a mistake. But I wouldn't. Not tonight, not ever, because I knew the rules, and the rules were all that mattered.